Hello and welcome to episode 1 of Repertory Screenings Season 3. This is a movie podcast on the Abnormal Mapping Network. I'm your host, M. With me is my regular co-host, Jackson.
Hello.
And my regular co-host, Destiny.
Yo.
We're doing a movie podcast again.
Yay!
It only took 5 years. I don't know how long it's been since Trash Ratio.
3 years exactly. It was about this time, 2016, that it stopped. We did it for a full 2 years.
I guess we... no, it wasn't 2 years, was it?
It was 2014 to 2016.
I thought it was like 14 episodes or something.
No, it was longer than that.
Are you sure?
Yes, apparently we are going to type in the middle of this episode. And start looking things up. It was... Let's see here. Go to the board to find out.
I might cut all of this out, so...
Yeah, no, that's fine.
It was 22 episodes. It was...
You're right, 2 years.
2 years ago, May 15th, 2016, Possession.
Yeah, no. Exactly. You were correct. I was wrong. Okay.
Oh, 23. I lied. I read it wrong. Well, There you go. 23 episodes of a podcast.
So we used to have a movie podcast. Obviously, it went 23 episodes. I didn't know. I thought it went like 12. So
there we go.
And we always wanted to bring it back. If you listen to episode 0, you know that this is a long time coming. We have a good plan to watch all the old movies that are fit to talk about. But I figured before we get into our first movie, which is Citizen Kane, of course, we should talk about who we are a bit. Jackson, do you want to introduce yourself first, if this is people's first episode?
Yeah, sure. Hello. If you have never listened to any of our podcasts before, then I am Jackson. I am a non-binary person from the UK. That part's obvious, the UK part. And I am the youngest one here. I am only 25. And that means I'm kind of a little bit more new to things. I've done a degree in film, but it doesn't mean I've watched as much as anyone else here.
I was about to say, you were the one who went to college for this.
Means absolutely nothing. I've definitely watched less movies, and so I'm here to watch more movies and expand and talk about them a lot. Because I like movies, but then you go to school for them, and then you really stop watching movies for a while when you do that.
You and Dan Reichert.
But I'm free now. I'm free of school, so now I can watch way more movies again. It's great.
Yeah. Destiny, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Destiny. I'm a Capricorn with a Libra moon and a Gemini ascendant. Em and I have been romantically linked, according to the gossip rags, for, 6 years?
Yeah, about, almost.
Cool. And then I was on the original version of Repertory Screenings, and I was one of the old back in the day co-hosts of Abnormal Mapping. So you've probably heard my voice before. I've done Goof Zone, Your Faves Would Never, Badland Girls. Maybe somebody remembers Badland Girls, which is a podcast I did for 5 years with my friend Rhea. And I've been a movie nerd since I was 14 years old.
Yeah, you've probably seen the most movies of any of us.
Yes.
I first saw Citizen Kane when I was 15 or so.
Yeah, I was much older than that.
Yeah, I was a big nerd. But yeah, no, I'm really excited to do this.
I'm M. I will be doing the main hosting for this podcast. I am also a non-binary person. Me and Destiny live in the Midwest in the United States of America. If you could not tell from our voice, self-evident. I used to, as a, I guess, hobby, trying to go semi-pro, was a film critic. And thus I stopped watching movies for 4 years after I burnt out of that. So this is my good intro back into film. I'm excited to be doing this because we've been trying to launch this movie podcast forever. I have a lot of gaps because, one, I stopped watching movies for a long time, but also I never got around to watching all of the good old movies anyway, because who has seen them all, really, other than Destiny?
I feel like I haven't, like, I've seen a lot of movies. I don't know if they were all capital I important movies, but I do my best.
Trivia for history. The first podcast me and Emma ever did was a movie podcast.
That's true. That was a long time ago. That's not on this network. That was not.
That's not
anything
a
anyone
podcast
can
we
hear.
start.
It's forbidden knowledge.
That first one's probably fine because it was only you, me, and one other person talking about James Bond. That was a good time.
I mean, if you go back in the archives of this feed, you can find podcasts about James Bond with me and Kyle talking about Spectre. But we're not here to talk about Spectre. We're here to talk about a good movie. No, Spectre's a good movie. We're here to talk about well-remembered, important films, which Spectre is neither, unfortunately. And we're here to talk about Citizen Kane. Citizen Kane came out in 1941. It is written by Herman J. Mankiewicz and Orson Welles. It was directed by Orson Welles. Jackson, do you want to briefly tell people what Orson Welles is about? No one can really summarize what Orson Welles is about.
What's
Do you want to
about?
tell me what Citizen Kane is about, actually?
Citizen Kane is about a man who did the goddamn news. Charles Foster Kane dies. He's a newspaper magnate who lived at the end of his life in a secluded pleasure palace named Xanadu, after the Xanadu of old. And this newsreel runs. It tells the story of his life. He got a fortune, lost a bit of it in the Depression, went back up. Everyone knows who he is. He's very influential, had a sex scandal, blah, blah, blah. All the service level details of his life. And unsatisfied with this report, the editor of the newspaper sends out a man. We never see his face, but they send out a man to find out the heart of Citizen Kane. He says Rosebud when he dies, and they're like, that must mean something. That must be like a clue to his existence. And he goes and interviews various people about what Rosebud might mean, which is a way to go into various flashbacks, seeing the life of Citizen Kane, or I guess Charles Kane. He's not really called Citizen Kane in the movie. That's just the name of the movie. First name Citizen, last name Kane. Seeing the life of Charles Kane from various perspectives, including his father figure from the bank, because he's basically taken away from his childhood home because they lived in a gold mine, and this was part of the deal, because the mum sends him away because his dad's violent and it would give him a better future by having access to this money. There's his best friend, Jed Leland. There's his recent his second wife. There's his what's the Bernstein? There's Bernstein, who I like. What does he do? He's just kind of the business guy who is Charlie's friend.
He works at the newspaper, doesn't he?
He does. Yeah. But he comes in with him. He's like
he's not just like his assistant. Right?
Yeah, he's like a hype man.
He basically is the hype man, because Jed's his friend and they start having conflict with Bernstein's the hype man. And so that's the whole movie, is you just see his life play out from various perspectives. And it ends, and then you find out what Rosebud is, and if you have not been paying attention to the world for the last 30 years, or last 70 years, it's his sled. It's his childhood sled.
30 years ago, the spoiler statute of limitations was up, and everyone just told you it was a sled.
Before that, no one was talking about the sled.
I knew that it was the sled because of Animaniacs and stuff in the 90s. Well, 10 plus years before I actually saw Citizen Kane. So,
yep.
I didn't even know what the movie was about. I knew Rosebud was the sled.
I knew Rosebud was the sled as well. I had no idea what the film was about, but the Rosebud's definitely the sled. And that's the movie on a very surface level. Now let's ourselves do our own flashbacks to watching Citizen Kane.
Yeah, okay.
Look,
I looked it up. Mr. Bernstein is Kane's personal business manager.
Yeah, hype man. Checks out.
Should we talk about context? Or
yeah, sure. If you want to talk a bit about context, to be my guest.
All right. So this movie almost wasn't. Essentially, what happened was Orson Welles blew everybody's minds doing theater and radio, and he got this unprecedented sort of package from a movie studio where it's all right, you're gonna get he gets this crazy contract from RKO where they're like, you get people's attention. You're very like, you did that War of the Worlds thing. We want you really badly, and we'll pretty much give you whatever you want. So he signed a contract that he would act, direct, and produce and write 2 films, and yada yada yada. He got Final Cut, which was like super rare in those days for an American filmmaker. And people in Hollywood were like, who is he? He was only 23. So they didn't really like him from the get-go. But then he, gets with his co-writer, Herman Mankiewicz, and he's like, friends with William Randolph Hearst, who is this yellow journalist. He essentially owned all these papers. He essentially started the Spanish-American War. I'm not going to go into that. Based on lies. He was a terrible person. And it was a conflation of him and a few other people that they based the character of Kane on. And at some point, when the movie was about to be released, a bunch of studio heads got together and were told by a gossip columnist that Hearst was paying to kind of spy on, keep his eyes and ears in Hollywood, essentially. She saw the movie, came to the studio heads and said, hey, you can't release this. It's all about Hearst. If you do it, he'll sue the pants off you. And they came to Orson Welles and they were like, all right, we want to destroy the negatives. And he was like, no. And I don't know how he got them not to destroy it. In a movie about this, he like gives an impassioned speech, but essentially, Hearst refused to talk about the movie in any of his newspapers. So when it did come out, not a lot of people saw it. So it took a long time for it to kind of build its rep as a great American movie, because it did okay at the box office, but like Wells' career was super hurt, and movies that he made after Kane were never as critically acclaimed or well received.
I suppose I should cover the like technical reasons why people cite Citizen Kane as like one of the greats, but I'm going to tell you right now before we get into this, crediting Citizen Kane with like inventing any of these is specious at best. They all pre-existed, but in a technical sense, Citizen Kane was known for a long time. When I was young and was like, why is Citizen Kane popular? The reason I was told or read was, it did all of these revolutionary things with film using like forced perspective and matte paintings and miniatures and deep focus to create like a very unique look, which none of those things are new in 1941. Like they've all been done for 20 years. Citizen Kane, Orson Welles in particular understood that you don't have to be the first if you are the most, and thus Citizen Kane is the most of all of these things. For a movie about newspapermen standing around talking about their bad decisions, it has a ton of special effects.
Yep.
And
a lot of them seamless.
Yeah, really seamless. Just like some of them really showy, some of them like in a modern sense you wouldn't think of them as showy, but there's like when you, especially like watching this on Blu-ray, you can like see the matte paintings more readily. And it's just really obvious how much like he will just take go from like a conversation shot to pull out to a big miniature in which people are superimposed waving out the windows of the newspaper building that stretches off to infinity. There is like a maximalist sense to Citizen Kane that is appropriate given its subject matter being like as we segue into like our feelings on the movie, like about the birth of like the 20th century and the ethos that robs people of morality, good sense, ethics in general. I don't know. So we all like Citizen Kane, right? We've all seen this a bunch. We all watch this again and we're like, yeah, this movie's still great.
Yeah, the reason we chose it was like Citizen Kane is a movie that has this reputation as being, not through any fault of its own, as just like a stuffy, important history movie, right? Like, when things get elevated to the level of classics, there is a tendency to assume that they are kind of boring and impenetrable.
Yeah.
And that's often not true. Like, this is a very just, poppy movie. You just watch it, it goes, it's watchable. It's not like highbrow in terms of like talking down to its audience in the way that, because of how school teaches things, you would think about a lot of like, movies like this or books, or, it's why everyone ends up hating Shakespeare, but then people who read it after school like it.
Yes.
And so we all came to Citizen Kane, I assume, like, outside of school. Like, I did it in school, but I didn't, I wasn't really about it then. And I love it. I think it's a really fun movie. It just flies by. It's 2 hours long, but it goes by instantly.
Mm-hmm. I bought the 70th anniversary, like, Blu-ray in, I guess, 8 years ago now, which is a terrifying thing back when I was buying movies. And just on a whim, because I'd never seen it, I was like, oh, this was like on sale on like an Amazon deal of the day or whatever. So I bought it and watched it a couple times since then. Yeah, the thing that surprised me, this is maybe the first like really old movie I went to and it was just like, oh, this is just like, it feels very modern. Even for movies of this era, it's super watchable. It's both funny and sad in the way that you would want a movie like this to be. It's just eminently approachable, and thus it's kind of perfect for like our first movie, right? Like, we picked it because it's Citizen Kane, and that's the joke. But also, it's just one of these old ones that require, you can just go watch this. You can just watch this right now. Maybe you've never watched an old movie, never seen a thing from the 40s. I guarantee you're gonna have a pretty good time with Citizen Kane.
I think the relatability of just a rise and fall story is what makes this movie kind of timeless. That's pretty trite to say, but it's just one of those things where he starts out, he's this principled person. He even writes out his principles. He's like, I'm for the working man. I'm going to help people out. And as he gets richer and tries to fill his world with, materials and people, like he collects things and he collects people, and he loses that morality, and he never really, like, he never really has like a redemption arc in any sense of the word. He just loses people left and right, and then he dies.
Yep. I think it's interesting because it like presents as the very typical rise and fall person has principles and then gets too successful and loses them, and everyone around him stories, and it is that. But I like that it's a movie that like when Orson Welles, when Citizen Kane, every time when Charles Kane writes down his principles in the newspaper, you're not meant to. Like, I don't think I'm meant to assume in that moment that he believes that these are like good things that he's standing up for. He's this very static character in a very interesting way, in that like he never becomes one of the rich people, right? Like, there's that fantastic scene early on where the actual rich guy is like, "Why didn't you invest anything?" And he's like, "I bought stuff. That's what you do with money. I bought stuff." And then there's that other scene later on where Jed gives him this incredible speech, kind of completely throwing back all of his principles in the face. Like, your idea of standing up for the working man is being like a figurehead for people who like you just want to like you. You don't actually want any of these people to get organized, then you wouldn't have any money. And it presents these two like things. It's not like he gets worse. It's just him understanding his place in the world, right? Or us understanding his place in the world and his life. And I really appreciate that way of framing this kind of story.
I think he does believe in those principles, because like one of the most overarching things about him is where he came from, and he remembers being ripped away from his mother, and he didn't want to leave his parents, and then he ends up with what's his name, Mr. Thatcher.
Miss Thatcher.
And and he spends most of his adolescence sort of like joking about how he's just gonna do whatever he wants. Like, he essentially buys the paper because he's like, I think it would be fun to run a newspaper. And Thatcher gets all choked up and like hilariously, yeah. Everett Sloan, I think, is the actor that plays him. He's really good. Yeah. But yeah, like, I think he believes it. I just think what happens is he, like, the major difference between those two scenes of him writing out the principles and him sort of being confronted by Jedediah and realizing that he's a huge hypocrite is that he's an older man now. He's been through a lot. Like, he's lost his son, he's lost an election. I think he did believe that at some point. I really do. And I think that saying Rosebud at the end, and he's always got that sort of maybe subconscious and sometimes conscious urge to like reconnect with the kind of person he was as a child, but yeah. I think he realizes he can't win over people with this power. Like, he becomes power hungry.
I think one of the things that's like interesting to me in that stuff is the moment where he fires Jed, right, is like it's something it's not showing that he's like lost all his principles. It's showing what his principles actually are, because he writes his awful like review of his wife's opera and finishes it for him, and that's Kane's idea of what it means to be principled, and it's clearly a full of shit. Like, no, like that's on no world is finishing your friend's bad review of your wife's opera in your paper that you the paper's a vanity project for you, but then also your wife's opera's a vanity project for you, and then you're writing your own like takedown of it because that's somehow respectful for your friend. It's like clearly not actually in any way related to real morality, but in Kane's warped sense, that's what honesty is finishing that review in that moment.
Yeah, like he has that interior code.
The thing for me is like, this is a story of a kid who sees it, like, he's given away because the money is enough to like rip him from his mother, and like as an adult you look at that and it's like, oh, she's trying to get him out of a bad situation. But in the scene, like, he definitely sees it as his mom tells him to go away with this banker who doesn't care about him, right?
Yes.
And is clearly a phony, and he hates him and has always hated him. And then he grows up like bouncing around schools, failing out of all of them upwards, because to Kane, power is the permission to do things the short and easy way. Like, if you have enough money and if you have enough influence, you don't have to like succeed. You will automatically just get what you want because that's what the structures of power are. Especially right. Like as someone rising up in like the end of 19th century, early 20th, he just becomes like, through his trust fund, a person with means and the capacity to do stuff. Like, you know, he flunks out of all these schools and ends up being someone who knows that he's very clever and knows that he has a lot of money, and that's the two things he relies upon. The thing I always remember is like when he's right before, as he writes out those principles, he's like, I want to be to the city what these gas lights to the city are, and then turns the gas light off and walks out of the room. Like, it's like he wants to be this constant that everyone relies upon, but doesn't understand what actual love is, because he's like a love-starved person. Like, to him, love is people in your orbit who like recognize your power. And that's kind of the thing Jedediah says when he finally yells at him. He's like, you know, it's the 20s. There's going to be a labor movement. You need to understand that people aren't just going to owe you fealty because you're a rich person. Your ideology doesn't extend past your checkbook, and that's not forever. And he specifically says, like, you don't need, like, people don't, you want people to feel like they owe you gratitude. And that's not how this works. And that's like what he does with his wife. Like, she says, oh, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a singer. And then he builds her an opera house because that's what he thinks affection is and how you earn people's like respect and love, because he has no idea what human beings are. She
doesn't even say she wants it. She says her mother wanted it for her when she was a kid. And he's decided, no, we're going to be a great opera singer.
Yes. So I definitely think that those principles are his idea of what the people want.
Yes.
Like this magnanimous top-down sense of, I'm going to fight for the little man because I know I'm not the rich person. But also, he's never been the little man. He bounced through every rich school in the world for like 10 years. And doesn't even know how to like hold a conversation with normal people, much less like fight for their rights. All he wants to do is like disrupt things. Like he is the epitome of like tech bro disruption culture.
Yeah, I mean, like this movie like ends up playing 100% as a very relevant thing watching it like today, right?
Yeah, he could just be the CEO of Uber, and it would almost be the same movie.
Be identical movie. The CEO of Uber absolutely walks in and was like, "I want our app to be like the gas in this light." Turns it off.
Yes.
And it's very good at that.
Yeah, I want to be the thing people think of when they think of moving across the country, and gives an impassioned speech about cars as his IPO tanks, and he puts every other business out of work, and then his business goes under, and the world is worse off for it.
And I like that while the movie is a critique of that, right? It is definitely about why this is an awful thing, and a hollow thing that isn't a good thing to be as a person. It doesn't come across as a like takedown movie. It's not about here's all the way Kane is bad, because that's the easy answer. Mm-hmm. It's much more about like, because there's that fantastic scene where after the flashbacks with his second wife, with Susie, and like all the awful things that Kane has done. Like literally, she's spent this entire time telling this reporter just how awful he's treated her, and then the reporter goes, "What did he say?" He says something like, "I can't help but feel a bit sorry for him," and she just looks at him and goes, "You think I don't?" And that's this incredible moment of like, people don't do bad things or become just monstrous evil people for no reason, right? There is like a tragedy at the heart of this, that society is melding these people into this way.
Yeah. I mean, like, we call it, like, celebrity culture now. I feel like Wells would probably call it, like, the myth-making of,
yes,
like, this era of American capitalism, like the robber baron era, where, like, you know, there's many things in our world today still named after Rockefeller, who was a bad person, who just happened to have a lot of money. But there are these stories and charisma wrapped around the great American success story that pull people into its orbit, who, even when they realize they're being played, like, on some level are like wistful and find it charming. Jedediah actively like doesn't speak to Kane for decades and still like looks on him nostalgically, because at one time he was his friend and he was charismatic and he was pulled into that orbit and enjoyed success based on it, even if all of that he knew was at the whims of this person who had power over him. It like Orson Welles, like Kane as played by Orson Welles, isn't a monster because he does bad things. He's a monster because he believes that he's exactly as good as he is charming. And that's a terrible combination.
So bad. He gives a Hitler speech.
He does give a bit of a Hitler speech. He basically goes, but her emails, lock her up.
He yes! Does. Like, because I don't actually want to say, you know, if this movie had been more... I'm surprised there wasn't incredibly loads of... God, I can't talk. A billion awful think pieces in 2016 about Citizen Kane, right?
The one thing I found, there's a great sort of... I don't know. It's like a kind of political, kind of literary podcast called The Relentless Picnic. Right after Trump was elected, they did do a sort of deep dive into the movie through the lens of it is Donald Trump's favorite movie. And they talk about how he just he did not get the moral stuff. The only thing he says about it is he says some dumb stuff about Rosebud, and then he says, my advice to Kane, it would have been to get a better, like a different woman. And then one of the great editing things in that podcast episode is that they play the Kane speech, and then right after they do play one of his weird, like, I'm gonna hire a committee to investigate Hillary Clinton sort of speeches. So yeah, no, it's out there. It's just, it's kind of surprising there wasn't more of it.
Yep.
Yeah. Like a big part of that speech is him going, I'm not going to make campaign promises because I'm too busy winning this election. I'll give you the things I know you want when I'm elected and not tell you what those are, because he assumes he's going to be elected because he has this groundswell of support. And the movie doesn't go out of its way to not depict his opponent as like a corrupt politician, right? Like he's absolutely one of those like slimy, institutionalized, like probably organized crime linked politicians of the cities of this era. But he also understands that you can't just waltz in and de facto name yourself the winner of elections like this, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we live in the bad future where absolutely you can do that. So, whoops.
Yeah, the thing that ruins his political career is that he's cheating on his wife, and the opponent.
Yes, and people react to that negatively.
Yeah, like. His opponent, is the one who, like, blackmails him into, like, revealing it to his wife and to the public. And he marries her, like, 2 weeks after his divorce? But yeah, no, he totally loses his, election over it. It's crazy. How quaint. Also,
his newspaper immediately like claims election fraud, is the thing they go with.
Yes.
Yeah, the bit where they're like, oh, that one. They just slowly lift the headline up into frame and it zooms in on it. It's very funny.
Oh, this movie has so many great zooms and wipes and pans and
the scene where they're having breakfast and it shows the complete absolute dysfunction of his first marriage, that starts with his wife being like, oh, I wish you'd come home more, darling, and him being like, I've got a paper to run, huh? And they're all kind of, on good terms. And after a few whip pans, it's just her just completely filled with pettiness reading the Chronicle.
Yeah, they're like at the table. They never leave the table, but these years pass. It's like a Thornton Wilder play.
Yeah. While he's reading his own newspaper.
And they're further apart.
They're further apart, sitting completely in silence as it pulls back from them. Incredibly funny.
Yeah, that's a very famous sequence.
Yeah, and also in both that, like, their costuming gets more and more like elaborate and well-to-do. It reminded me a lot of there was an article going around about like The Favorite as costuming showing moral decay as things get more like elaborate and ostentatious. How it represents like this veneer over like the hidden nastiness of the upper class, which I think is very good. Like, we got an email, jumping a little bit ahead, but it was calling me out specifically as someone with a well-known crush on Orson Welles, asking, can Welles get it? And I love that from the first shot of him, like 25 years old running the newspaper, you're like, oh, yes, absolutely he can get it. And by the end of this, he just turns into like this like egg-headed old man, that has lost all of his like charm and charisma. Like he's just stiffly walking through his dead mansion with no one in it.
And then like technically the last time we see him alive, he's getting wheeled away in a wheelchair by like a nurse or something. And the camera, it's implied that the camera is secretly filming him through a fence. And that's kind of like the last of him.
Like he dies with like the thing he wants, right? Which is a bunch of people who are indebted to him forever, that they owe their existence to him, and absolutely nothing real. I
mean, kind of, but like all he's left with is employees, right? Like everyone who is morally or emotionally beholden to him is gone. It's just this shitty butler and the staff, right?
Oh, the butler's so shitty.
Yes. I love that guy.
Yes.
I know, Rosebud, you gonna give me some money for it? And then he's like, he said it, I guess. And then he's like, I already fucking knew that, mate. You're not getting your money.
the interviewer going, like, when he tells him the story, he's like, yeah, I knew about Rosebud. He's like, oh, you're a Seminole guy? And he like sneers and goes, yes and no, as he just dispassionately tells him about his boss dying.
Yeah, the only person that still cares about Charles is Mr. Bernstein, who has that giant, almost like saintly portrait of Kane in his office when he's being interviewed by Thompson.
Yeah.
It's really funny to me because, like, even Jedediah till the end, he's just always like, ugh, like, he was so selfish. He was so selfish and does not believe in him as a principled person. Susan, the second wife, she's like, ugh, he, you know, my only free act was leaving him. It was the one thing he couldn't control. And then Bernstein's just like, I owe him everything.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he's corrupt in his own way. It's kind of implied. I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like anyone who's got money in this movie is bad, right?
Yes.
Which is the most, like, if I were 25 and they were gonna let me have creative control over a script, that's exactly what I would write my movie about.
It's what the things he got away with are a lot. Like one, being so blatant about the Hearst connection is very funny. But two, one of the first things that happens in the movie is that Kane walks in the middle of this newsreel and goes, "I've been talking to Hitler. There will be no war." This movie came out in 1941, so
yeah, it's crazy how he just had them.
Yeah.
The thing with the Hearst stuff is really funny to me because this isn't specific to a single person in history, right? Like, this can be the story of so many great men who decide they're going to be the, like, voice of the people or the on the pulse of public opinion. Like, yeah, it applies to Hearst, it applies to Trump, it applies to dozens of other people.
Every single tech CEO ever in history.
Yes, every single tech CEO, every American president of the last 100 years.
Right, yeah. Like, the point of this movie is that it is an entire class of people.
Yes. The thing that I appreciate in all of this is, like, for all this highfalutin, this is what it is, this is what history is, writ into a human drama. The casting of a bunch of theater actors who mostly have not done film means that everyone is just hamming it up the entire film.
There's so much acting.
Specific shout out to Joseph Cotton, who plays being an old person like your Colonel Sanders for some reason.
So I listened to the Roger Ebert commentary, not the whole thing, but about those Joseph Cotton scenes. So they were rushed, the elderly Jedediah scenes. They were rushed because during the scene where Wells is running after his wife after she's, you know, they've gone to Susan's apartment and the political opponent's there, he runs down the stairs to chase her and he broke his ankle. So they couldn't film the shots they wanted with Wells. So they were like, all right, just hurry up and get Cotton in old man makeup. We'll do these scenes. And he hated his bald cap. He thought he looked stupid. He got that hat and wore it to try to, like, make himself look better. And he was never, like, he was quoted as saying something along the lines of, like, these are the worst parts of me in the film.
He was correct.
He was absolutely correct. He was fully
No,
correct.
I like the dialogue in those scenes. I like that
I think I enjoy it as, like, a hammy, campy thing. Like, it's his depiction of, like, the old guy who realizes he can just kind of get away with being, like, openly, like, the sleazy id of this person is really good.
He's constantly asking after a cigar.
Yeah, like everyone's met an old person who just doesn't give any fucks anymore, and it just knows they can get away with stuff because people will excuse their bad behavior. And sometimes that's charming, and sometimes it's the worst, and most of the time it's both, in varying degrees. And he plays it really well. But, like, of all the actors in this movie, I'm like, oh right, Joseph Cotton, he's the one who was in a bunch of, like, movies. And seeing him chew the scenery when his, like, modern, like, just normal adult Jedediah stuff is actually really understated. Like, he's, like, the most I'm here to do good acting work while everyone's being ridiculous. The juxtaposition, I think, is one of my favorite things because he plays the old man version so broad.
Well,
he really does.
It's great because, like, young Jedediah just believes in him so much. He follows him from school, and he, when he realizes he doesn't have his principles anymore, like, you can tell it's pretty early on where he loses his admiration for Kane because everybody's singing along to that song.
Yeah, Kane buys all of the, like, old guard newspaper men because he wanted to have the best newspaper and doesn't know what that means, and then celebrates by bringing in a marching band and a chorus line of dancing girls,
and has a song written about him, a folk song. And Jedediah can't even, like, bring himself to sing along. Bernstein's, like, super into it, and Jedediah's like, oh my god, what is this?
Well, I like that Jedediah bought into this idea that, like, we're going to be the reformers, we're going to change the world. The old guard is old and corrupt, and our people with ambition and new ideas are going to come in and change stuff. And the first thing that Kane does is, like, buy all the old men he was fighting.
Yeah, and Jedediah, as he becomes more and more disillusioned, he starts drinking a lot more.
Yes. Anytime you watch... go ahead.
I like that stuff because Jed's like... The moment that Kane and Jed fall out isn't the moment that it's not because he sells out his principles necessarily, it's because Jed realizes that although they had this camaraderie and were basically inseparable in school, that him and Wells are not in the same class and will never be, right? No. Like, he will never have folk songs written about him. And it's just this moment where through this ludicrous scene, as all these girls come in and everyone starts dancing and screaming and everything, Jed just, like, slowly realizes this just gulf that can't be crossed in what it means to have, like, actual power in America.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like that.
Yeah. The thing that these movies, like this movie and a lot of movies set in this era, remind me is people used to drink. I have one beer and I'm like, I'm ready to just kind of lay down for the afternoon, and these people are just slamming them down all the time. I guess this is what happened before you could check Twitter, right? You just had another drink.
I mean, that's fair. Imagine how much less dignified this movie would have been if Charles Kane was fucking posting.
I mean, you watch The Newsroom.
I watched The Newsroom. That's true. I watched The Newsroom, and the president is posting 24/7. He's got a poster's brain.
Oh,
and it's broken.
Oh,
imagine if Kane's contempt of his wife crossword puzzles were like a 20-tweet thread on Twitter at 4 in the morning.
What's wild is what were you gonna say, Jackson?
I was just gonna continue joking about that. I assume you have an actual point.
I was gonna say that even though, like, Wells swore up and down and Mankiewicz swore up and down, the screenwriter, a co-screenwriter, that, like, yeah, this is a conglomeration of people. Like, the movie dogs his entire life. When his son dies, the obit has a headline in one of the papers: "Son of Citizen Kane dies."
That's the sequel to this movie, Son of Citizen Kane.
The thing I like about that is that it basically proves the point of the movie, whereas, like, it doesn't matter what the truth is, like, the myth will always be bigger than the reality. Like, he probably didn't mean it to be entirely Foster Wallace, but it's that now because people associate that, and you can't dictate to the people what the truth is going to be if they choose to believe something that's wrong, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I really like the way the son stuff is handled, because you would think, right, in a movie about a man who is deeply connected with his childhood and trying to get this moment back, but can't understand why he's lost that, you would think that would, like, play directly into, oh, my son, who is my child and my legacy and blah, blah, and all that stuff, like, lines up very nicely, and you would assume that's what the movie would be about. He's barely in it. It skips over his death so quickly. You never see Kane have any real emotional reaction to his death.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say, it's only mentioned in the newsreel at the very beginning of the film that the son dies with the first wife in a car accident. But yeah, that you don't actually see that scene. I don't know if it's because the people that Thompson goes to interview have no, like, insight into that, or what. But yeah, you never get that.
I think it's both, right? It's like, one, I assume Kane doesn't, think too much about that. because he's just constantly chasing all these things and trying to fill these holes in his life. But two, there are like the wife dies. They can't talk to the first wife. They can't talk to his son. There are people who have insight into this man who are gone, and when those people are gone, then you can't know the people they know, right? Like, there's information that gets lost. You cannot get a complete picture of someone's people die. That's how history works.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The fact that there's so many gaps makes this, like, even in a movie about like getting to the truth behind the myth, still about the various myths that the individuals involved have of their own. Like, their depictions of Kane don't all line up, and I think the ways in which they don't are interesting and good. Not in like a full-on Rashomon, like the facts are wrong, but like Wells definitely plays Kane as different people to different viewers, right? Like, the way he treats his second wife is so different than the way he treats Jedediah. And you feel the same level of contempt, but the way it expresses is so different.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially, like, that first scene, which is from Thatcher's perspective, when he's, like, just running the newspaper office. Everything's good. He's just, like, so in his element and completely shutting Thatcher down. And then you see that era from Bernstein's perspective, who still, like, is into Kane, but seeing that era from, like, the start of it and him just, like, completely basically running this foppish newspaper man immediately out of a job and saying, I am the man with the principles now, you can go fucking, lose your job. Is just like instant in how completely different like that is, because you see none of the human cost to what Kane does in that first scene. You just see, I want to run a newspaper, and then he is, and he's great at it. Look at him, it's Charles Kane. Here he does things. And then the second you actually pull back on that, it definitely tries to highlight that he displaced people in order to take over this position, that there are people who do not have his power, that, like, if a rich person's going to come in and demand that they do a thing, they are kicking out someone else who was already doing that every time.
It's also really disturbing how he literally is responsible for starting a war. Like, yes. That is heavily implied. It's one of the main things in the newsreel. And Bernstein never really, like, brings that up. It's very strange that there is a very real human cost that is completely ignored.
Well, I think the movie is very aware of the way that myths and thus newspapers can completely dehumanize stories, right? Like, the things that Kane is responsible for and the moral lines that Kane crosses in the movie are the personal relationships directly with the people that are being interviewed. It is when he hits his wife. It is when he fires Jed. These are the, like, people who are close to him who he betrayed. But in the background of that, like, it is unquestionable that he has had, like, a monstrous effect on the world. And I think the movie is, like, he gives a Hitler speech. It's not subtle about the way that Kane's desires are having this effect on society that cannot be ignored. And I like that it plays with those two levels, right? Because in terms of a one-to-one responsibility sense, the wider newspaper stuff is absolutely the moral failings, or the most morally horrific acts he commits are literally starting wars. But that's not what people care about who are, like, within his orbit, because they're all
they
about the
remember he cheated on his wife. Yes. And he lost that election, and what? Nobody talks about the son dying. Like,
nobody talks about that.
The thing to go back around to that is, like, he is so much a person defined by his childhood was interrupted / ruined and then corrupted by, like, the things he was given. And because the son is so absent, like, you get the sense, like, even if you want to read in, like, this is not a problem with the unreliable narrators, I think it's very easy to see a person who is so wrapped up in their own, like, lost childhood that they can't engage with the child that they have in front of them. Yes. Like, this is the way people with bad childhoods go. Either you become a parent who decides to rectify all the wrongs done to you with your child, or you can't get over your own problems to see, like, the potential for a future ahead of you. And he is absolutely the person who's so concerned with buying people's love because he never had it, that he doesn't remember his dead child, right? Like, on some level, he's more concerned about his sled than any of the people he lost in his life. Because those people were stand-ins for that thing, and always were.
Right.
I think it's really poignant that the night he meets his second wife, Susan, he's actually going to see about the storage of a bunch of stuff from his mom had passed away.
Yes.
And it had been a few months, and he was gonna go through his childhood stuff that she had saved, and he gets interrupted because, you know, he gets splattered in mud and she's laughing at him, and he kind of, you know, he completely gets distracted by this young giggly woman and decides, you know, instead of going and being reflective and introspective about these childhood relics, I'm gonna try to make this lady into a singer. To the detriment of everything else in my life.
Yep.
I also think it's worthwhile noting, like, the minute that he's taken away by the banker, like that Christmas, he has another sled, which with like a different name, and it doesn't matter. It's not about the sled as like, it's about the representation in his life. Because like the other sled's like named Champion or something ridiculous.
Crusader?
Like that. Yes, Crusader. That's what it was.
Yeah.
Very good. Citizen Kane, not a subtle film.
Yeah, no, I do love that. Like, immediately he has a sled in his hand. Like, he another visual thing that I really like is the snow globe that he drops when he dies. You see it in Susan's apartment when he first goes in there, and when he's destroying the room after she leaves him, after they've been married, he sees it and he says Rosebud when he looks at that snow globe. And I don't know. And when it's in Susan's apartment, Ebert pointed this out, so I'm not like amazing. It's next to a childhood photo of Susan. So he automatically, you know, links snow with childhood. Just like a hammer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do love the scene where he completely destroys Susan's room after she leaves, because it's just the most petulant, pathetic thing.
Mm-hmm.
The big final moment is just him completely unseen. Like, she's left. It is the butler's giving the narration, but they're all outside the room. They're not really looking in.
No, the thing that I thought was really funny and very like well written is the butler does the opposite of what he should be doing in making sure no one sees this outburst and just lets the entire staff stand outside the door looking in.
Yep.
Yes.
It's because it's a spectacle, right? Like this rich, powerful man is just a child.
Yes,
yeah.
like, and say what you will about like ideas of like the help. The first thing a butler worth his salt would do would make sure nobody saw it or spoke of it ever, right?
That's true.
Worth his salt in a doing his job type way, right?
Yeah, in a actually expressing care for the person who's employing you. But Kane doesn't engender that sort of like affection. So instead, they just watch him have his baby temper tantrum.
Yep. And then he just walks away into the end of the movie.
Yes.
Yeah.
As you get that incredible shot where it's all the mirrors, and you're like, this is definitely the final shot of him, isn't it? I've watched the movie before.
Oh, so good. The entrance and exit of Wells in this movie, chef's kiss.
Absolutely.
Because you don't see him without makeup, like, what, 6 minutes, until 6 minutes in, maybe 7? I don't know. The newsreel's awful long. And it just jumps around in his life so much that when you finally see him, he's like in a chair and he turns around. He's got the newspaper and he's being sassy to Thatcher. And, it's so good.
Yeah, the reveal of young, hot, awesome Wells.
Yes.
It's a lot.
Ridiculous.
It's overwhelming.
It's crazy how hot he is.
Especially after, what you see in the newsreel.
Yeah.
And that scene at the start of the movie that's in, like, there's so many showy scenes in the movie, but I think that just because it's the first one and it's come after such a deliberately awkward newsreel, the scene with them all talking as the, like, projection lights are there and they're all in shadow is just illegally showy.
It's great. The reason he does that is because a lot of those actors play different characters later on in the film, because they didn't have like an amazing budget. So there's a lot of little tricks they do to kind of make things seem more epic than they actually are. So yeah, like the projection room scenes were kind of shot in a rush because they were supposed to be doing screen tests. and they just decided to film
Start making
those
the movie.
scenes. Yeah, start making the movie. That made him ahead of schedule, so nobody really bothered him, you know. But yeah, no, and it also doubles as being this really dramatic, intense group of men talking about this life.
It's incredible. God, there's so many. Just like we've talked about the themes of the movie a lot, but there is just a lot of #good shots, right? Like in a way that this movie is remembered for, to the point where it's kind of, you know, passé and made fun of just for being a showy shot movie. But they're good. They're good shots. The deep focus is good. I'm sorry, the deep focus is good.
I love the deep focus. I think it's great. And then, like, one thing that people always talk about is how this was one of the first movies of that era to, like, have ceilings for all of the rooms in the film. And it's because they didn't actually have literal ceilings. They made
just
them
light
out of...
racks.
They had, like, muslin cloth, and they covered up the lights and the microphones with that. And there's just so many ways you can play with light and shadow to just make it look like a ceiling. And then the rooms look more lived in and cramped and cozy, which is a great visual metaphor.
And it allows them to get a lot of, like, low angles in there, right? Like, especially by the end of the movie when, like... So at the start, it's just a lot of people talking in rooms, and there's a lot of showy effect shots. But then by the end of the movie, like, every scene in Xanadu is just, like... they're doing the thing where, you know, Susan will be like, I want to go out today. And then Kane will be all the way over here going, darling, we're not going to the town today.
Just across the room, echoing, yeah. A lot of the... best moments of dialogue in this movie really play with, like, people not being heard or having some sort of impediment between who they're talking to, them and the person they're talking to.
Yeah.
A lot of those low shots, they would just put holes in the floor, and Greg Toland, the cinematographer, would just get into the floor and shoot the movie that way. He was famous, and he, like, came to Wells. He got an Oscar for, I can't even remember the movie he got the Oscar for, but he comes in to Wells's office at RKO, and he puts the Oscar down, and he's like, I want to work with you because the only way to learn anything is to work with someone who doesn't know what they're doing. And
I like the descriptions of that, because, like, whenever Wells talks about this, and because everyone credits, you know, Citizen Kane as being this incredible movie with, like, innovative things that he's trying because he doesn't know, like, it's his first Hollywood movie, right? Like, there's a lot of things that he's not baked into how to make these. But it's important to know that it's not the thing where, you know, you're a film student, you look at this because maybe I'm a genius. It's
no.
The combination of completely inexperienced, very clever person and someone who's been doing this a long time and knows exactly what to do. And these two people mix together really well to make the movie look good. It just looks good.
There's a reason why Greg Toland shares the title card credit with Wells.
Yes.
Like, Wells... till his dying day, always gave Toland the credit that he deserved as, making up all of those creative angles and shots. Yeah, there's so much visual good. I didn't know that there was so much split screen in the film, where characters are just, like, there's a scene where Kane is sitting and Jedediah is behind him, and, like, the screen on Joseph Cotton is very, very close up, and it's a split screen, and I just assumed he was just standing behind him, and the camera was really good.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. Like, you read about some of how they do it. Like, sometimes it was visual effects shots of, like, they would paste two frames together. Sometimes they would do it, like, in camera, and, like, first time they shoot it, they would cover up this half of the lens. Second time, cover up the other half of the lens, and, like, use the same film twice so it already affects in camera. And it's just, like, wild shit. Anyway, movies look illegally bad.
Yeah, it's wild how this, with all of its special effects and all of its just optical illusions, looks crazy expensive and maximalist is the word M used earlier, and I think, yeah, that's a great way to put it. And then you look at movies today and it's like, where's the artistry?
Yeah, not to be obnoxious,
I mean, the thing about this is like every movie has like digital skies and set extensions now.
Yes.
But it's not about like all these techniques are the norm, but done without like any sort of like consideration
Intention.
towards the like for like what it's going to mean in the camera, like what it looks like in the scene, what it's doing for the story. It's just the techniques that are used because every movie's shot on a sound stage that you now want to make look like a city. Right?
Exactly. Yeah, there's no intentionality in the same way. And, obviously not everything new is got that problem. But
We're
this
coming
is
across
just
as very obnoxious now, but there's a truth to it, right? Like, movies should never have gone color.
They really shouldn't have. One of the best parts about that Ebert commentary is he points out that the reason why Susan and Charles meet on that wet street is because dry streets don't photograph well in that black and white film. The shiny, wet, rainy street pops. It looks great. It's got like reflective surfaces. They just don't make them like they used to.
God, we're terrible.
With that, I think it's time to probably start wrapping up because we have a bunch of emails and we're already pushing an hour. So
That's true.
I
does
could
anyone
go
have
on.
any final thoughts about Citizen Kane?
I love it. It's a fantastic movie.
I appreciate how funny I find it.
Yes.
Every time I watch it, I'm like, oh right, this is just like a good time and also a good story.
I think one of the things that just always will stay with me is how it shouldn't be as timeless a story as it is. I could watch this movie once a year and still find new things to pore over.
Okay, let's move on to emails. If you have emails, you can send them to podcast@abnormalmapping.com. They can be about anything. They don't just have to be about the movie we're talking about, but these 4 are. Jackson, do you want to take the first one at the bottom and we'll work our way up?
Yeah, so we have our first email from Logan Kenny, which has 4 questions in it. We'll just do them rapid fire. They're not very very detailed. Some of them we've already got into a little bit, but 3 questions, 4 lines. Best Orson Welles film that isn't Citizen Kane?
I would say F for Fake. I kind of want to go and rewatch all of them,
Yeah.
but F for Fake is probably my favorite.
I think Touch of Evil is the only one I've seen. If there's another one I've seen, then I've forgotten it. So I think Touch of Evil is the just by default of being the other one. But it is very good. I love it.
I have to think about it. Give me a second.
You were watching The Third Man last night.
It's not his movie though. He just
I know,
acts
but I
in
mean,
it.
he's in it. Like, with
That is
Citizen
an
Kane,
Orson
or
Welles
with
movie.
Orson Welles, I feel like maybe that can like. He's such a presence that like I would have accepted Third Man and not questioned it as a choice.
I mean,
for
his act. Okay, he and Joseph Cotton are both in that movie, and they're both amazing in it.
Yes, it's really
my
good.
favorite like performance of Orson Welles is mostly Harry Lime in The Third Man, but my favorite directorial film is 47's Lady from Shanghai.
Mm-hmm.
It has Everett Sloane in it, Rita Hayworth, who was married. Well, no, they were kind of like estranged when they made that movie together, but it's like this really sort of dark noir film. It's super good.
Yep. The other question is, what is your first experience with the film? I think we talked a little bit about this, but if there's any more specific details anyone wants to get into.
no, I mean, I think I said why I bought it and how I watched it.
Yeah, I watched it on a whim on DVD one day. It was great.
Yeah.
There's this track on the White Stripes album, White Blood Cells, that is just full of quotes from Citizen Kane. And the chorus is the "It Can't Be Love, for There Is No True Love" song that plays at that party that he throws for his wife. And there's just a billion lines in that song. And I just remember hearing that in high school and being like, oh, I gotta rewatch Citizen Kane.
The final question is self-explanatory at this point. Could Orson get it? Come on.
Yes.
Yes.
Come on.
My God.
All right, I have a question from Jen, which is generally, do you think Citizen Kane contributed to like Orson Welles' career decline? As like, and she coached in terms of like making a piece of work so incredible that the rest of your career can't keep up with it. I think much like Kane himself, Welles's problem was not the things he made, but the ways in which he made them.
Yes.
I agree.
Like he just burned so many bridges, and Hollywood was way even more of it like a tight knit like boys club than it is now. That absolutely they made sure that he never had the career that he should have had because of the way he made this.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he lost his contract. Like it got renegotiated after Kane. Mm-hmm. So when he released his second movie, Magnificent Ambersons, he didn't get final cut. There were all these problems with production, and then of course, like no one really saw it. So he kind of just lost like whatever goodwill he had, built up before the movie. By the time it was released and he was expected to keep making them, it was really hard for him to come back from that.
Yep.
Next question, Jackson.
Next question. We have one from our friend Alison Autumn-June. And she asks, Citizen Kane has been one of my favorite movies for like 8 years. And every time I watch it again, I'm always shocked by how I still like it. After I started to transition, I didn't like most of the movies I had liked back when I was a teen, quote-unquote, boy. However, when I last saw Kane, about 6 months before I started to transition, I was still in love with it. Do you have a similar experience with it? I'm sure you've gone through life changes since the time you saw it. But judging by tweets before the podcast, you still really like it. Are there any other movies that you thought you would grow out of, but actually still love?
Me and Jackson were talking about Terminator 2 not 2 days ago.
I sure will.
I can't believe I still like a lot of those early Tarantino movies as much as I do.
Yeah, no, I think Tarantino is a shitbag, and I don't particularly like the last couple of his films. Still have a lot of affection for a large portion of his body of work. Even recognizing all the problems in it.
Mm-hmm. I definitely feel the same way. I'm also surprised that just a lot of those 90s indie movies hold up as well as they do. Not all of them.
I won't follow you down this road.
I don't know.
Clerks is still good.
Clerks is still good.
Clerks 2 rode the roller coaster out of that one, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's one that
I can't rewatch Clerks 2, but I could rewatch Clerks right now.
I guess Kevin Smith would be the one for me of like big teen boy movies.
I would watch Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back right now.
Right fucking now.
But not Clerks.
No, Clerks would be fine. Not Clerks 2. Not Mallrats. I never liked Mallrats.
I always
good. You
liked
shut your face. I bet Chasing Amy is still good to the point where it's like hilarious, like problematic stuff is like now just very funny. It would be my guess.
I always thought that it felt like almost charming in how much it like describes a real situation, but clearly by someone who's never been in the situation,
right? And has a hard time seeing other people's point of view.
Yes.
I think a lot of movies are reinforced. Like as I get older and like more cemented in my identity, even like politically, I think I find certain revisits like more enriching.
Most of the things that I was really into when I was younger, even if they're bad, I still like can go back to and still like appreciate in a big way. Anime podcast has documented some of this. I think the things that it's easy to like note the things that this didn't happen to. For example, fucking Serenity.
I have not rewatched it as an adult.
Firefly's always been bad. I'm high on this horse.
I will leave you right now.
I was very into it as a teen, but last time I watched Serenity, I was like, God, what? Oh my God.
Yeah, no.
I think they might be the South.
Yeah, I think they might really like the Confederacy and really not want to put actual Chinese people on the screen, but talk a lot about China.
I agree with the China thing. I disagree with the Confederacy thing. I think
You
that's
should
a
watch
really
it again.
simplistic read.
You should rewatch the thing.
But true. I say, okay, by the way, I said I hadn't watched it as an adult. I first saw that movie when I was 20-something. So, yeah, no, rewatching it as a 30-something. I'll let y'all know.
Mm-hmm. It is like, on the face of it, a lost cause. Like, our glorious rebellion did not go down well, and now we live in the aftermath story. Like, that's why he's a cowboy, because he lost the war.
Also, the twist in Serenity, spoilers, is that they gave people drugs that made everyone lie down and die because they're trying to just neutralize humanity. The big farm, not big farm, it's more like the government have put, it's chemtrails. The twist is chemtrails.
Yes.
Chemtrails killed the world.
Fluoride just turns people into sheep.
You have to understand that they had to cram, all this stuff that was supposed to be a TV show into a film. Yeah, no, I shouldn't. Yeah, I'll stop.
Joss Whedon will be okay somehow.
Our last question is from Landon, who watched the movie for the first time in preparation for this podcast. Congratulations, you've seen a good movie. I didn't mean that condescending, Jackson. Don't laugh at that.
I know you didn't mean it that way, but it was very funny.
And one question here, was there anything in Citizen Kane that you wish modern cinema would do or pull inspiration from that it hasn't already? My answer is being under 2 hours long.
Yep. This is a fairly long movie for the time.
Yeah, 100. Well, I mean, that's not true, because there's lots of movies of this time that are maybe not 41, but before, there are plenty of 3-hour movies from antiquity.
True. That's true.
But Citizen Kane is a nice 119 minutes in and out. It tells a huge story that feels exhausting, but it doesn't take forever, and it feels exhausting in the good way, where it's this is appropriate for the story being told. Yeah.
I was thinking for more 30s, 40s noir movies and not epics of the time. What kind of things would I like to see people bring back? I mean, yeah, definitely the weird, stylistic split screen type stuff. I would like more of that in an intentional way. Big movies just look very flat now. That is the cool look. Marvel movies have ruined everything for everyone.
I agree. I definitely love an interior epic where it's just the rise and fall. Let's make more movies like this. Let's make more movies like There Will Be Blood. I could eat it up.
You want to watch some prestige television with me, Destiny?
Sure. Always.
They got you covered.
I guess you're right, but I like it in a movie.
Those are the questions.
Yeah, those are the questions. So I guess we should announce next time. In 2 weeks, we'll be coming back with our second film, which is Morvern Callar, which is a Lynn Ramsay film from 2002. It is British. Jackson, since it's British, where can you find it in your country?
I have gone on to Just Watch and had a look at where you can find it, and it is on Amazon Prime.
Destiny, where can we find it in the US?
Amazon Prime.
As far as I could tell, it's only available there. They must have a distribution deal, would be my guess, because you can't even rent it on Google Play or anything. So that's surprising.
It's on iTunes in the UK to buy as well.
Okay.
So you can get a couple more places.
Yeah,
but it's also on Amazon. But it's not super well distributed. But you can get it for $3.49 if you need to.
Okay.
Does not require you to steal it.
And that's it. Destiny, tell people where they can find you online.
I am at FridgeBuzz now on Twitter.com.
Jackson, plugs.
At Headfuls Off on Twitter is where you can find me. You can find other podcasts that Em and I do at abnormalmapping.com, including Abnormal Mapping if you like video games. There's a bunch of others there as well. But you can also support us on Patreon. Yeah, if you go to patreon.com/abnormalmapping, you can support us at a variety of tiers. The one most people choose is $1 a month, which gets you a bonus podcast called The Great Gundam Project, which me and Jackson record, put out once a week on Wednesdays, watching all of Mobile Suit Gundam, the anime franchise, 2 episodes at a time. We are currently going through Victory Gundam, and we're going to record that episode right after we finish this up. So, very excited for that.
It'll probably be out tomorrow as of when this goes live. You can find me on Twitter at @em_being. You know where to send emails, podcast@abnormalmapping.com. You can just at any of us for talking about movies whenever. We have a Discord. If you go to abnormalmapping.com, there's a link to the Discord. There's a movie channel in there. You can talk about movies. We always are talking about movies, is what I'm saying. We all have Letterboxd.
Oh shit! I need to get that in order for everyone now that that's coming
Yeah,
out.
I haven't been updating mine. I need to update mine.
Can I bulk remove all the reviews I made in 2012?
I
Please,
think you
Letterboxd.
probably just have to make a new thing, unfortunately.
hell.
Just make a new account.
No, I'll keep it, but delete the really bad ones. I've deleted some of the really bad ones.
Okay. I will never delete the really bad ones. If you can track down my old movie blog, you can just see all the reviews I made. Some of them are probably terrible.
I
they're pretty
loved
good.
your movie blog. I am biased, I know, but I still go back to your movie. Like, if I watch something, I will go and look up what you thought of it back in the day. And read it.
Go look. I was about to shout out a specific piece, but I won't. Go look at the movie blog.
Yeah. That's it. Thank you everyone for listening. You can find this at repertoryscreenings.com. Tell your friends, leave reviews on iTunes, whatever people do. Definitely tell your friends, because word of mouth is how we get all these shows out and about. And thank you for listening. We'll be back in 2 weeks.